really tight game between the Colorado Avalanche and Toronto Maple Leafs. A wild win that came at a price, and playoff races that nobody knows what's going to happen next. All on today's edition of Locked On NHL.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On NHL. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That's my good friend and my co-host, Hunter Hodes, the co-host of Locked On Penguins. And we want to thank everyone that's making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So on today's show, we're going to talk the Avalanche and Maple Leafs, the really, really tight game, playoff type feel. Two teams we know are bound for playoffs in about 3 to 4 weeks from now. Comes down to one goal. We'll hit on the Minnesota Wild and Seattle Kraken. The Wild, who have really had the roughest run of injury luck maybe of any playoff team in the entire NHL. We'll hit on them in our second segment. And then in our final segment, Hunter and I are going to build our conversation outwards a little bit, talk about the playoffs at large in both the East and the Western Conference. But starting with the big game last night, light schedule last night, Wednesdays, for whatever reason, the way the TV rights are allocated, usually we're only getting 3 or 4 games to work with. So Avalanche and Leafs, these are two teams that entered the season as strong playoff contenders. The Avalanche, I think a lot of people, you and I included, were skeptical of their goaltending situation entering the season. Ultimately, the team agreed with us. They overhauled their goalie room in season. They've since added Charlie Coyle. They've added Brock Nelson. They're trying to get healthy. The looming specter of a potential Gabriel Landeskog return is also hanging over this, where he's been practicing with the team over the last week or so, and he's ramping up in hopes of returning for playoff hockey. And then the other side of this, you have the Maple Leafs, who went out and added Brandon Carlo, who has fit really nicely with them so far in his 2 weeks or so as a member of the Maple Leafs. And these are two teams that, when you play a team in your weight class, we would say, these are really important. These are measuring stick games. These are how you learn what you're about. And last night, that was pretty good. That was a pretty good measuring stick game.
It was a really fun game to watch. I was actually watching it while finishing up my bracket because March Madness is about to start. We're recording this at noon. So the first game, Nick, is about to come on in about 10, 15 minutes. I was filling out my bracket, had the game on, and it reminded me so much of a playoff game in April. Tight checking, not a lot of whistles, not too many times where, you're getting special teams. It was a lot of fun, man. It really was. The goaltending was really good. Austin Matthews has been on a heater this week. He's been fantastic. The Avs, Nichushkin got a goal. But I know some people don't like low-scoring games. And, hey, I would prefer, 4-3, 5-4 game myself. But these games, like these 2-1 games, they still got to get you going a little bit because the playoffs are right around the corner, man. Like, we're literally a month away from the Stanley Cup playoffs starting, and I felt like this was a really nice preview of what's to come in the playoffs. I know these two teams would only play if they got to the Stanley Cup final since they're in different conferences, but you're going to see a lot of these types of games in the playoffs in the first round, second round. You actually see more of them the deeper you go in the playoffs because the refs swallow the whistles a little bit more. So I just really enjoyed watching this one. And again, you look at the standings right now, in the Atlantic, for example, Toronto, that was a big win because they now have 85 points. They're tied with the Panthers for first in the Atlantic, same amount of games played. Tampa Bay, they're 2 points behind. They also have a game in hand, but still, this is a big game standings-wise because Toronto's probably trying to avoid one of the Florida teams in the first round. And then Colorado, even though they lost, they still are 2 points up on the Minnesota Wild, even though Wild won last night. And I think, again, you're starting to see the playoff picture become more clear. I know at least for most of the spots, some of the wild card spots, you're still seeing this turtle race to the finish, especially in the Eastern Conference, but you're starting to get a lot of clarity with a lot of these playoff spots.
So we're going to throw it to Locked On Avs first, because the perspective on the Colorado end is a little more pessimistic and frankly a little more interesting to talk about.
All right. The Colorado Avalanche lose to the Toronto Maple Leafs 2-1 in interesting fashion, Kyle. The 2 goals they let up, one was off the stick of Devon Taves, and the other one is going to be on, I don't want to say highlight reels, maybe low light reels for quite a while. A ref just inexplicably toe picks and falls down, stopping the puck, leaving it for a Toronto Maple Leafs player to pick it up and score a shorthanded goal. And there you go. What do you got to say about this thing? This was crazy.
Yeah, it's not like the Avalanche didn't try. You registered 39 shots. You looked like the more aggressive team out there. Puck luck just wasn't in your court. The Avalanche just had to find better shot selection, make it work. It just didn't happen. You didn't walk away with a win, but can't be said about it too long. You have Ottawa tomorrow.
Yeah, quick turnaround. So you get this out of your mind as quick as possible. And you have to mention Joseph Woll in this game. Sure, you can talk about the ref falling down, and that's going to be the talking point. But Joseph Woll for Toronto was otherworldly. And it's unfortunate for the Avalanche because we've said that so many times this year where the opposing goalie just seems to have their best game of the year when they're going up against the Avalanche. A lot of times the Avalanche can overcome that and still beat those goalies because they have such powerhouse offense. But it just wasn't happening tonight. But you're right. Avs played a very good game. These things happen sometimes, but I'm happy that you don't have to stay frustrated too long about this game. And you turn right around and you got another game tomorrow, which is tough, against Ottawa. So there you go. Go ahead.
And the good thing for Joseph Woll, when you have games like this against the Colorado Avalanche, they'll sign you in 3 years.
And when we talk about it in terms of that, sometimes it really is just like that. You can play a really good game, and if you don't score, you can't win. And you can control the flow of the game.
All you need is a hot goalie sometimes, man. Like we say this every time the playoffs come around. When a goalie gets hot, good luck, especially if you have the offense that can help you out as well.
Very well said, and we'll throw it to Locked On Leafs.
It was a big night for Joseph Woll, who was outstanding for the Toronto Maple Leafs, making 38 saves in a 2-1 victory over the Colorado Avalanche. Stephen Morcity here from Locked On Leafs. And it was not a game I would necessarily say the Leafs dominated. The Colorado Avalanche certainly had the majority of the chances in this game, but it was the Leafs goaltender who stood tall with one of his better performances of the season. And Austin Matthews continues to improve and show his great form, scoring his 4th goal in the last 3 games. Steve Lawrence had the game-winning goal on a pretty unfortunate play for Colorado, but a very fortuitous play for the Leafs as the puck went off the referee, Kelly Sutherland, and Lawrence was able to take it down and score shorthanded to give the Leafs the 2-1 victory. It is their 2nd straight win after a 1-4-1 stretch. Made a lot of people pretty nervous about where the Leafs were going. That is 2 straight victories. They're going to continue to push to try to get themselves back into that race in the Atlantic Division, hopefully try to push the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning. We'll discuss that and more on the next edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast.
And real quick, before we take our first break of today's episode, I don't want to say the Leafs have really kind of underwhelmed me, but I think all of us at this point are looking at the Leafs through the lens of, until the playoffs get here, it doesn't really matter what you do in the regular season. We've seen you win the division. We've seen you have really good regular seasons. We've seen Austin Matthews win the Hart Trophy. We know you guys are good enough for the regular season. But at the same time, we want to see you do something in the playoffs to take you seriously, because I haven't been overwhelmingly impressed. Their goalie tandem's been decent. When Chris Tanev was healthy, he was doing a nice job back there, but he's been out for a decent chunk. Their deadline addition of Brandon Carlo is meaningful and a nice piece, but until you win a playoff series or two, I'm not really that impressed.
It's like the meme that you and I always discuss. What are you prepared to do about it? Nobody believes in you. What are you prepared to do about it? The playoffs don't start for a month. Yeah, they're going to, I guess, maybe coast a little bit towards then. I think obviously they're going to try to probably avoid playing Tampa in the first round, because this year's Tampa Bay team is, I think, one of the 3 best teams in the conference. But they got to show me something, man. You have not had a deep run with this core 4 throughout their tenures.
Nope.
I know the Eastern Conference is not as good this year. The top 3 for me are still the 2 Florida teams in Washington. But sooner or later, you have to break through at some point, right? So we'll see, man. Yeah, like they can win these regular season games. You can beat these really good teams. That's great. Show me something, especially if you do, for example, play Tampa in the first round, or if you avoid them, for example, Nick, and you are able to win the Atlantic, which is a distinct possibility. Again, they are tied for first right now. If you can get first in the Atlantic and play one of the two wildcard teams, whether it's, Ottawa, Montreal, the Rangers, the Islanders, for example, just throwing out some of these teams that are in the race, like you need to go out there and show that, okay, this year is different for the playoffs. And by the way, if they did win the Atlantic and the Senators got the first wildcard spot, sign me up for that battle in the playoffs. I think that playoff series would feed families. But bottom line, man, they got to show me something, especially with a couple big names UFAs at the end of this season, namely Mitch Marner.
That'll do it for our first segment. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about the Wild and Seattle Kraken game from last night, the loss of Marco Rossi, and what it means to a very depleted Wild team right after this.
Did you know getting a good night's sleep is the number one recipe for long-term success in life? I didn't. It took me way longer to realize than I'd like to admit. It was years of tossing and turning. I was always tired. I never felt like I could live up to my potential, but not anymore. Thanks to Bear Mattress. I used their sleep quiz and I matched with the Elite Hybrid. It's perfect for side sleepers like me. Now I wake up energized. I'm getting deeper sleeps and I'm ready to attack the day. No matter how you sleep, Bear Mattress has a match for you with a focus on recovery, cooling, and pressure relief to upgrade your sleep and improve your overall quality of life. Go to bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL at checkout for 40% off site-wide. This offer is not available anywhere else. You have to use my promo code on the very last page of checkout to get this discount. That's bearmattress.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL for 40% off site-wide. Bearmattress.com, promo code LOCKEDONNHL.
Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL with Hunter and I. And Hunter, you and I, we're in the same boat with the Minnesota Wild, where you like all of the individual pieces, but the injuries this year have been otherworldly problematic for them. When you go down the list of guys who have missed games for them this season and how many games they've missed, I mean, Matt Boldy and Marco Rossi have played every game to this point, but you go down that list, Faber's missed 4, Marcus Johansson's missed 10, Jacob Middleton's missed 10, John Merrill's missed 10, Zuccarello missed 15, Hartman's missed 10, Spurgeon has missed 14, Philip Gustafson's your goalie, you don't worry about that. Joel Eriksson X only played 42 of a possible 69 games, Jonas Brodin only 38 of 69, Kaprizov only 37 of 69 games so far. No team can withstand those types of injuries. And look, you got to give the Wild credit for being in a playoff spot in spite of all of those injuries.
I mean, yeah, they just got to get the horses back. Really, like, I know that's obvious analysis from me, but they really do. Like, you're not going to go anywhere without getting your big horses back for the playoffs. But it goes to show how well their coaching staff has done throughout this year to really stay in a playoff spot. Like, yeah, I know, Nick, they're not in a top 3 spot in the Central right now, but they're still 39, 25, and 5 this year. They've won 2 in a row, 5 of their last 10 games. They're still making headway without their big guns in the lineup. But hey, they get these guys back for the playoffs. Look out, because they can cause some damage whoever they play. Like, when they were healthy this year, when everyone was chugging along, they were beating great teams left and right. Like, you get Kaprizov back on his A game, you get Eriksson back on his A game, you get the goaltending from Gustafsson, for example, and with how stingy they play in their own zone, they will be more than a handful for whoever they play in the playoffs, whether it's the 2-3 matchup in the Central or whether they get one of the wildcard spots. Probably right now it's looking like it'll be the first wildcard spot and play someone like Vegas. Like, I would take Vegas to win that series, but Minnesota would make them earn it. I think that's a 6-7 game series right there. But still, for a team that I don't think a lot of us had high expectations for this year, I mean, I didn't even have them making the playoffs this year. So despite the low expectations, they have had such a great year despite the injuries. And I really hope they can get a lot of their big guns back for the playoffs, because that is a fun team to watch, especially when Kaprizov is cooking.
And the one last thing I'll say before we throw it to Seth of Locked On Wild, that Wild team is capable of playing a first-round series against Vegas the way Dallas did last year. And look, I know Dallas was the higher seed last year, and Vegas only got in as the 8th seed. They were very injured in the regular season last year. Very capable, Minnesota, of playing 6-7 games of 3-2, 2-1 hockey and really grinding it down and making you, as the more talented team, work for it. So we're going to throw it to Seth of Locked On Wild.
Another win for the Minnesota Wild that came at a price. Hey, everybody, Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, recapping a 4-0 win for the Minnesota Wild over the Seattle Kraken. The Wild scored 3 goals in the first period in a span of 1 minute, 42 seconds, as Matt Boldy, Liam Ogren, and Ryan Hartman all tallied goals. Matt Boldy added an empty netter later in the game, and Philip Gustafsson recorded the shutout. But the big story, Marco Rossi, who left this game after taking a slap shot off the inside of the knee from Matt Boldy. He did not return, and the injuries already at an insurmountable rate for this Minnesota Wild team, losing another top 6 forward and losing another center. That's a tall order for this Minnesota Wild team to try to muster. We'll keep an eye out for updates, so make sure to stay tuned to Locked On Wild wherever you listen to your podcasts.
One of the real essential components, and we say this every year, and this, again, you said it before, this isn't groundbreaking analysis, but one of the keys to playoff success is being healthy. You need your best players available and in the lineup, because you think about the Leafs last year in the playoffs where you had Matthews miss a game, you had Nylander miss a game in that first round series against Boston, and all you needed was 1, all you needed was 2 goals, and maybe you make it to the second round. Then you talk about the Bruins in the second round where Marchand gets concussed, he misses a few games, you don't know the difference 1 or 2 guys can have, and it's really essential, and it's the one variable you really can't account for when you're putting your team together, because you don't know when guys are going to get hurt. And yeah, you can say, well, if guys get injured, they're more likely to get injured again. So you can try and avoid guys who have injury histories. But that's this is a contact sport. You're never going to be able to avoid injuries altogether. Like, yeah, Matt Boldy and Marco Rossi hadn't missed any games yet to this point in the season. That's not indicative of them not potentially getting injured down the road. That's just good luck, in all honesty, on a team where everyone seems to get hurt.
Right. And even if you don't have one of your star players for a game or two, you're still going to need your depth players to really step up. And sometimes, Nick, you can't rely on that. Like sometimes they're not going to score in that big moment when normally it's one of your best players that can produce for you in the situation. It just makes it that much harder to win. So again, the luck element of a deep run, I think people really underrate that when it comes to winning a championship. You got to get lucky, and not just a couple areas, but in more than a few, in my opinion. That might be a hot take to some, but to me, I think you also have to get quite a bit lucky.
All right, we are going to take our second break of today's show, and when we come back, we are going to dive into the wide scope of the playoff races in both conferences, where it is still very much up for grabs with a month to go. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. Now, I am not a huge regular season college basketball fan. The only regular season college basketball game I watched all year was a game I went to in person. So I am very chalky. I will be riding with big favorites, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening all day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid out instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all March long.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the Bracket Breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
thank you to everyone who was hanging out with Hunter and I here on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL as we make our way through what's been a weird NHL season, I think would be the way I would describe it, where last year it felt like whoever got in those last spots in both conferences, they were going to the gallows. Like even Vegas last year going into that first round series where a lot of injuries at the end of the regular season kind of limping in, and they gave a valiant effort against Dallas. But this year it's had a different tenor. I feel like the races have been a lot more academic, for lack of a better word, because there's been real separation between the division teams and the wild card teams, where even in the East, where the Devils have been injured beyond belief, no Dougie Hamilton, no Jack Hughes, and they haven't really ever been in danger of falling out of one of the division spots. You think about Carolina, who's had the Mikko Rantanen saga develop and leave for Dallas over the course of a month.
They've won 7 in a row, by the way.
And they've gone on a nice little heater, all against the backdrop of a Washington team that's largely come out of nowhere to be this good this year. And it really makes picking the East all the more challenging, because when you don't know what you think is going to happen, when there's a lot of uncertainty, you try and lean on your certainties. And that's why I've gravitated towards leaning towards Florida and Tampa Bay as the teams I feel the most confident in. And then, I watch games where Tampa Bay has lost really badly, or they've been in rock fights. And it's like, why do I trust Tampa Bay again? They won the Stanley Cup 3 and 4 years ago. I guess that's really all I got. Picking the East is impossible.
And I think with Florida, I think pound per pound, when they're healthy, they're the best team in the conference. But these last couple of years, they just played so much hockey. That's the one thing that gives me pause about them a little bit is, are they going to get gassed for another deep playoff run, Nick? Back-to-back trips to the Stanley Cup final. You won one of them, obviously, last year. Do you have enough in the tank to get back for a third straight year? Obviously, we just saw Tampa did it recently. They got to 3 in a row. But then you could kind of tell in that series they were out of gas. But that's still, again, the one thing that lingers in my mind. Will they get gassed, especially after playing, in my opinion, Tampa Bay at some point before the conference final? I think we're going to get that series. Are they going to be too beat up from that series if they advance to get to another Stanley Cup final? Because that's a real thing, people. Those two teams, if they play each other, are going to beat the ever-living crap out of each other. It is going to be 7 grueling games where the winner of that series is going to be ridiculously sore and is going to need a little bit of time off. But in the Stanley Cup playoffs, you don't get that much time off unless you are able to get one of your series out of the way. That is also a really underrated aspect, I think, of making a deep run. A lot of teams that win the Stanley Cup, each year, they have one series where you get it out of the way in 4 to 5 games. If you don't do that, you're kind of setting yourself up for success. You can't have every series be 6 to 7 games. So that's why, especially, for example, if Florida, gets one of the wild card teams in the first round, they got to take care of that team pretty quickly, because Tampa Bay is probably looming. I would take Tampa Bay to beat Toronto if we get that 2-3 matchup in the East. And again, those two teams are just going to beat the ever-living crap out of each other in the second round if we get it. And in the conference final, how much stamina are they going to have left? So I still think Florida, Tampa, and Washington are the 3 best teams in the East. We'll have to see how that transpires in the playoffs. New Jersey, I'm still concerned about, man. No Jack Hughes, obviously, for the rest of the year. We don't know if Dougie is going to be back for the playoffs. People really underrate just how much of a loss he is. He does everything on the back end. So, and I just watched the Penguins beat the crap out of them last weekend. I don't trust that team heading into the playoffs, though I also don't trust Carolina either. So, again, I think it's three teams in the East that I'm really confident in. The rest, I still got to see. The wildcard races, though, are fun in the East right now, man. Ottawa, it looks like as of right now, they have a 5-point cushion, Nick. I think they're going to do it. I think we got to see if they can finish this off. Montreal, what a story that would be if they get in, by the way. This is why you want your young players to play in games like this, man. No one expected them to make the playoffs this year. You and I even said during our preview episode, if you can be playing in meaningful games but even not make the playoffs, that's a success. Making the playoffs will be beyond even their expectations, I think, for this year. So this has been a really fun team to watch. Cole Caulfield is putting on a dazzling display on an every night basis. They're getting good goaltending. I really think it would be a blast if Montreal got in. You have the Rangers, though, they're 1 point out. The Islanders, by the way, the Islanders play the Canadiens tonight, Nick.
Playoff game.
That is a playoff game. This might be the Islanders season. They're kind of like cockroaches. They don't ever go away. They've climbed their way back into it slowly but surely. Must win game tonight. Like, I really want to see what happens in this one. Obviously, the Blue Jackets are still there. They've been such a fun story. The Red Wings are kind of there. Boston, they're still there as well. After that, the bottom 3 teams, Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Buffalo, not really. And then in the West, man, Calgary is still a really fun story, but I hope that they're not running out of steam. They've lost 7 of the last 10 games. The Blues, though, are red hot, Nick. They've won 7 of 10, 3 in a row. But Vancouver's right there as well. And if their big dogs can continue to be great down the stretch, I think they would hopefully do just enough to get in, because I don't know about you, man. I need to see Prime Quinn Hughes in the playoffs again. Like, I got to see it, man. Come on.
It would be, and Quinn Hughes is their most important player. We talked about this last week. If he's healthy, even if he's only 85%, he's good enough to drag whoever the Canucks put next to him.
Oh, yeah.
And largely, when you are that dependent on one defenseman, and as a Ranger fan, I can attest to what this is like, where you only have one of your 6 guys you trust regularly to go out there every third shift. But the West, I don't know, man. Calgary has definitely hit a bit of a wall, but then they go out and just dog walk the Rangers the other night, where the Rangers were just uncompetitive how much the Flames had the puck. I mean, the Rangers finished the game with 14 shots on goal in a regulation hockey game in 2025, which is almost impressive how bad that is. The Flames aren't a Clamps McGee lockdown defensive team. The Flames just had the puck a whole lot and basically made the Rangers, it was a game of keep away to try and go get the puck. And you mentioned the Blues, who are somehow alive. You look at that Blues roster, it's not impressive in the slightest. You've got a couple nice pieces, but they're hanging around, and you win a couple games. And
Montgomery's a good coach, man. He really is. The way they play in their own zone, that really impressed me. Even though the Penguins beat them last week, the way they played in their own zone still really impressed me. Their forecheck impressed me. This is a red hot team right now. Yeah. And Bennington's been good this year. We got to say, he's been fairly solid for the Blues all year. So I'm excited to see how this West race plays out. There's not as many teams jockeying for that final playoff spot in the West, but it's still going to be a cool race to the finish here.
I am very curious to see what happens. I personally think it's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing. It's a good thing these races are coming down to the last week of the season, like it looks like they're going to. But at the same time, all of these teams objectively stink. If you watch on a nightly basis, you have no idea what you're going to get from any of these teams. And I think that's a really strong indicator. They're all pretty mediocre to bad and are largely taking advantage of the environment around them. I know we talk a lot about the larger conversation about when the NHL is going to expand, what that means for the talent pool, that type of thing. And I'll leave you with this thought, guys, as we wrap up today's episode. But you think about how many teams there are on a nightly basis that are just average to outright bad. And then we're going to add another 2 teams to this. And there's going to be enough talent to go around to make teams, to have competitive teams. And look, I know the NHL's goal isn't to have 32, 34, 36, 40 competitive teams. It's to make as much money as possible. And the more teams you have, the easier it is to do that. But we don't need a more diluted talent pool. There aren't enough good players to go around for 32 teams, let alone 36 or 40, like the NHL's talking.
Also, we don't really need expanded playoffs. I've seen that topic thrown around. The only thing I would at least semi-understand is what the NBA does, Nick. 7 versus 10, 8 versus 9, something like that. A best of, 3 if they wanted to, I guess, experiment with that. But we don't need, best of 7 series with expanded playoffs. 16 is half the league is good enough with me, man. We don't need to expand that. We can talk for days about the playoff format and how awful it is and why Gary wants to die on the hill about it. But, we could probably do that as we get closer to the playoffs. But again, overall, we don't need to have that talk with expanded playoffs with more teams and 7-game series. It's just, there's no need.
It really is unnecessary, but that will do it for today's edition of Locked On NHL. Make sure you're tapped in tonight. Some really important games. You got Vancouver, St. Louis, Montreal, and the Islanders, like Hunter said. Florida and Columbus is really important for Columbus, and then the Rangers and the Leafs. The Rangers really need that game. So it's a really good slate. I know March Madness is rolling, but by the time 7, 8 o'clock rolls around, you're going to want to get situated. It's a good couch weekend. We will see you guys next week.